Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss some of the greatest movies ever made and what makes them amazing, and if they are worthy of our distinction of a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and I am sitting across the internet, back to being across the internet this week from my dear friend, the Cliff Booth to my Rick Dalton.
All right.
Mr. David Hollandshurst. You got Cliff.
Thank
How
you.
you doing today, buddy?
I appreciate that. I like the Cliff. Designation. So I'm pretty stoked on that. That's a good start. I'm happy to talk this movie. I'm happy to be Cliff, and it's damn fine coffee, let me tell you.
Damn fine coffee. We are discussing our first Tarantino this week. We're doing a little run of Tarantino's. And we're starting with his most recent picture, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Wow, came out a couple of years ago, and but it is his most recent. And somehow we found a way to get from Dune Part 2, and the connection to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is through Austin Butler, who's in both films. So that was a fun little...
Yeah, it's a flimsy pretext, but it's enough. it's enough. Like, I mean, truly, we don't need any kind of justification to talk about Tarantino. This can be done without pretext of any kind. He deserves to be talked about, especially since we have done this thing with directors on a few occasions now. We did Spielberg, we did Nolan, we did Gerwig, we've done Villeneuve. We would be remiss if we didn't do Tarantino and pretty, amongst those other directors. So, yeah, we're talking Tarantino just for the hell of talking Tarantino. That's all you need. That's
right. Tarantino is my personal favorite director of all time. It's kind of fluctuated or changed, I should say, from a number of different directors. But I just think for me, Tarantino, if he's done 9 films now, he's 9 for 9. In my opinion, I don't think he's made a bad movie. Some are obviously better than others, but I have a soft spot for all of them. And I think he just keeps getting better. And Tarantino, for those that don't know, has now said that he's only making one more film. He thinks of Kill Bill as sort of one film split into 2 parts. So, he can kind of
after my own heart. I can totally relate.
And we know about that. And then he's doing 10 films. His last film is rumored to be about a movie critic. Fitting. And that's what the rumor is. Obviously, he keeps things very, sealed and under wraps. I read somewhere about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there was only one physical draft of the script. And when people were reading for it, or, I think he only himself, DiCaprio, Pitt, and Robbie read the whole thing. He kept the third act like a secret from everybody. And when they read it, they had to go to his house, and like people had to sit down, and he would just watch them, and they would just read the whole script in front of him. He'd just like sit and watch like people in other roles and stuff. And he kept it like the third act, like locked in a safe in his house. He doesn't want anybody to get out to anywhere.
Amazing.
For any sort of leaks. So yeah, his 10th film, I don't think he's in any rush to make it, but he said he likes the idea of there being 10 films in his filmography. And it's like, he doesn't want to be making movies until he's like 80. He wants to sort of have this like run of 10 films. And then he said that's not to say he won't do other things. He's talked about television, miniseries. Maybe he'll adapt Bounty Law, which was the TV show for this. He's got a bunch of scripts for that. And, obviously he's written a novel now, and he's written a nonfiction book. He wrote, the novel he wrote was a novel adaptation of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is great. And, anyways, I'm rambling about Tarantino. We're going to get into Tarantino. But yeah, I could talk about him and his films all day.
Yeah, and that's sort of your job here today is to go on and
that's right
and wax on about your ghost, and perfectly happy to facilitate that. If you'll allow me one moment, I'm going to open a door because on cue, one of my cats has decided to start screaming. So bear with me one moment.
Okay, go open your door. Let your cat. I will keep talking about Tarantino and his 10 film run. Interesting thing also about Tarantino is that he's written a few movies. He's written Natural Born Killers, True Romance,
yeah.
and From Dusk Till Dawn. He's kind of written all those, and so he's the 10 runs is just ones that he's written and directed. So yeah, that'll be hopefully it doesn't take him the next 10 years to make it, but he does take his time, and he really enjoys the film process, obviously being on set, but also just writing. And so he took him, I think he was writing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for I think 5 or 6 years before they actually even kind of decided to make it. I think he knew that they were always going to make it, but he took his time with it and really dragged out the process.
Yeah, I heard there was a rumor cooking around at one point, and I almost wonder if this is like counterintelligence by Tarantino, but that he was going to be making a Star Trek film, and that was a pretty like sort of long running thing. Like it didn't just burn out, so it gave it the sense of maybe some truth. I would be really intrigued to see that. Maybe if that's something, it doesn't seem like he'll direct it, but if he were to be, part of the script writing process or a producer or something like that, that'd be super cool. Because, how could you not love that mashup of styles and ideas? To see Quentin just in science fiction would just be a really cool thing.
It would. I love that he loves that it's like this 10 films. He's done 10 films, and that's kind of all he wants to do. It's all he wants to say when it comes to, he's kind of said everything he needs to say. But, for somebody that loves film as much as he does, like he's the quintessential cinephile. Like I sort of have a hard time believing that it's like he's going to be done 10 and then like in 4 or 5 years, he might get that itch. But, he is, I don't know, he's closest. He's got to be over 60 now, I think. Like I think he's like, so, I mean, he's been making movies since the early 90s. So I can't imagine him. I guess that my thought is that I feel like he won't get bored, but he'll miss the process.
I think so. I wonder too if he thinks that he's seen his peers, or I guess his predecessors kind of wane in their advanced years. I think that's true. And he doesn't want that to happen to him. Though I did in research for this, I saw that he really liked West Side Story, 2021's West Side Story by Spielberg. So obviously he doesn't think that it's impossible to do great works in your advanced years. But maybe he just feels personally that he wants to hit it and quit it, get out while he's at the peak of his powers. I mean, like Seinfeld season 9, you're at your absolute height of your powers, and then you walk and you draw showmanship. You drop that mic and you hit that high note and you say goodnight.
Yeah. I'm out of here.
That's it for me.
Yeah, that's it. All right, so as we do every week, David gives us a little bit of a rundown on the film if you haven't seen it in a while, and or if you haven't seen it at all, and you want to get caught up on a little backstory of the synopsis of the film and some info. So, Dave, as you do every week, you want to hit us with that rundown.
I will, and if last week's was the longest rundown, this one might have been the trickiest. When you're trying to sort of distill a Tarantino film, it's harder than you might think. Because anyway, I'm sure you'll understand as we go through here. But the rundown: Once Upon a Time in Hollywood centers on the lives of Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, two fictional members of the Hollywood Old Guard whose run appears to be at an end. Rick, former star of the TV show Bounty Law, now finds himself relegated to playing the heavy on vehicles for younger actors, while Cliff, His erstwhile stunt double earns his living as Rick's driver and handyman. Now, running concurrently and living next door to Rick, we also witness the story of Hollywood's hottest young couple, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. Yes, that Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. In classic Tarantino fashion, a lot happens here without a lot really happening. In what seems like the span of the day, Sharon goes to see her own movie, Rick delivers a vindicating tour de force guest spot, and Cliff crosses paths with the Manson family. After a montage of an Italian sojourn where Rick shoots a few spaghetti westerns and a Bond ripoff, we achieve our narrative confluence as Manson's acolytes descend on Rick's home instead of Polanski's, and history is rewritten in a much happier fashion as two good old boys and a dog absolutely wreck some dirty hippies and their deranged helter-skelter plot. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was released in 2019 and directed, of course, by Quentin Tarantino. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton, Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, and features the talents of many great actors in supporting roles, such as Austin Butler, Dakota Fanning, Kurt Russell, Al Pacino, Timothy Olyphant, Lena Dunham, Sydney Sweeney, Luke Perry, Emile Hirsch, and the list goes on and on and on. The film cost about $96 million and brought in an estimated $377 million. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was nominated for 10 Oscars: Best Actor for Leo, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Director for Quentin, obviously, Best Original Screenplay, Best Picture, Best Production Design, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Supporting Actor for Brad Pitt. It only took home 2 of these, however, those being Production Design for Barbara Ling and Nancy Haig, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Best Supporting Actor for Brad Ya Boy Pitt. And that is your rundown.
Okay. It's a good little rundown. This was tough. This was the year that, like,
compared to our last one.
The Dune rundown was quite the rundown.
That was something.
But yeah, the 10 Oscars, it was tough because this sort of came out the year that Parasite came out. And, Parasite is one amazing film and sort of kind of swept the awards. But like, I sort of watched this, and especially with somebody like Leo, like I was like, man, Leo should have won. Joaquin Phoenix won for the Joker, which is
a hell of a performance, I will say.
Yeah, the Joker I don't love the Joker. I've
got thoughts.
I thought it was I got thoughts on it. I don't need to. There's just part 2 coming up. Maybe we'll do that. But
I know.
I just feel like DiCaprio was so good in this movie, and there's a subtlety to his performance, and we'll get into that.
Absolutely.
But no, great rundown. Where we start?
Well, I mean, I think we've got to start with Tarantino. I think that is the logical point here. And as you mentioned, Tarantino is your greatest of all time, or at least, is in the running and has been either the GOAT or somewhere on the Rushmore for you. His resume is stacked. His style is so distinct. He's got to be on anyone's list, really. If you're compiling greatest or most influential directors, he should be there for sure. All of this is known. What I wonder when I was watching this, and when I watch any film by a great filmmaker, people of this stature, do they get judged fairly? Is this person sort of always competing with themselves and their own work rather than being judged against the current state of the art and their peers, which is how we would treat most other people?
That is a great question. It's sort of like, it's hard to look at, at filmmakers, directors, and sort of wonder, okay, if this is a great film, a strong film, it's like you sort of start having standards for filmmakers, right? Mm-hmm. You start putting them on, I don't want to say on, like, you just sort of expect certain things from filmmakers. And that sort of, that makes us go into film sometimes, sort of already deciding how we feel about it. I know Tarantino, like, he started off with a banger with Reservoir Dogs, and when he made that film and he kind of made it for nothing, but, he had Pulp Fiction teed up to go after that. And then he sort of has this run where it's like, you know, people see Reservoir Dogs and they're like, they're blown away by it. And like, at the time, people were just like, this is this incredible film. This is this new like writer director. And he's kind of, you know, he's got this cool style and everything seems cool and whatever. And then he does Pulp Fiction. And it's just like, oh my God, like Pulp Fiction in 94 was like, I mean, it was so huge. And it was like, if you stack it up against, and I mean, 94 was such an incredible year for films anyway, but he just kept setting the bar higher and higher. And then, so whenever he's making this, his next film, it becomes such a huge deal. And this is sort of what happens with great filmmakers sometimes, is like, we talked about it with Spielberg. You just sort of start like setting this precedent with your filmmaking and your style. And you're just like, oh my God, this is like, how can you top that? How can you top that? And for somebody like Tarantino, it's hard to judge him like against other filmmakers, because he does have such a unique, different style, right? And like he shoots things with such a love and passion for filmmaking and such reverence for like old work and referencing old things. And he's such a unique filmmaker in that way, that he's kind of like, he's just constantly referencing older things and referencing styles. And I'm sort of rambling here, but I guess the point is, like, in my opinion, he just kind of keeps getting better. And I think the great thing about his films is that you can look back on them and I feel like you can watch them. You can just continuously rewatch all of his films and keep finding new things about them. And I feel like that's the sign of a really, truly great filmmaker. And when it comes to comparing it to his other work, it's like, I feel like there's, it's like a Tarantino-esque style that when you watch it, you're like, I'm watching a Tarantino film. And 100%. It's something that you can't quite put your finger on. But it's like, in theory, you shouldn't really be able to, because you're looking at it, you're like, okay, I've got a gangster movie, I've got a kung fu movie, I've got a Western, I've got a like World War II war drama, I've got this like retelling of like Hollywood. Like it's like he's got such a different style with all these films, and they shouldn't all kind of fit in this kind of one bucket, yet somehow they do.
Yeah, there's definitely unifying aesthetics and stylistic choices that make it identifiably Tarantino.
Sure.
But like you say, the setting and the, I guess, the genre to a degree are so diverse. So it is interesting that you're able to have this unifying thread between them all. And yeah, I think with any great artist, you are judged against your work, because it's almost, yeah, like you say, people have these expectations of you based on your own achievement. And it's almost, it is unfair, but it's also unfair to, it doesn't seem quite right to judge you against mere mortals, I guess, so to speak. Like, you know, like a bad Tarantino movie made by another person would be their magnum opus, you know? So it is, I guess it's just sort of maybe a burden of success to a degree. But with all that being said, you touched a little bit on his style and how he's very referential, and he clearly loves old movies, but I don't think it's fair to just say that that's his only kind of angle. He is an innovator to some degree. Like, you know, when he came on the scene, like you say, it rocked people's world. And he's not really easily imitable, because like you figure at this point you'd see all kinds of Tarantino ripoffs, and I guess to some extent you do, but nobody's really done it well. No one's done it successfully. Like no one has. No,
nobody's done it well.
No, a lot of people have tried their hand at being the next Spielberg or the next Lucas, and they've done films like in sort of homage or in the style of Raiders or what have you, and probably successfully. But I don't think anyone's really imitated Tarantino effectively. So What makes this guy what he is? Where does the style come from? Why do we love it? And why has no one successfully ripped it off?
I think the key is for somebody like Tarantino, you know, we make note of like the references, you know, and it's like you can watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and you can see all these references, not just in, okay, he's referencing The Great Escape, or he's referencing, the countless movies that he references, and Bounty Law, and like all these, like, you know, whether it's fictional or it's like obviously making a reference to, older shows like Wanted Dead or Alive. And like, he's referencing all these things, but it's just coming from this, like this place of love and affection for these things. And just this like huge, like lifetime of knowledge when it comes to films and television. Like, he watches everything and he's seen everything. Yeah. And before we jumped on, we were talking about his book, which I was telling you about. It's called Cinema Speculation. And it's his nonfiction book where it's almost like a autobiography where he talks about like his film watching process as a kid, like when he was growing up. And he talks about sort of the movies of the 70s. So when he was like sort of in that, you know, he's 61 now. And so, like, you know, when he was in the 70s, that's when he was like going to movies by himself, and he's going to black exploitation movies, and he's going to these like indie films, but then he's going to see big things with his mom, his stepdad. He's kind of telling this story in that book. Like, there's literally hundreds of references to movies, like hundreds. And he watches everything, and he's seen everything, and he watches it multiple times. And he has this sort of affinity to filmmaking and the process. And it's like he's the guy in the video store. I mean, and he worked in a video store before he started making movies. He was working in video stores. You go in and it's like that weirdo behind the counter where you're like, I liked, you know, whatever. I liked this movie or The Great Escape. I want, like, tell me other movies that you can, okay, like, this is what you want me, you got to watch this movie. And it's like, he has 12 other movies that he can reference. And that was his life forever. He just loves making films. Another thing I'll say about Tarantino is every time he's on set, he does this thing where he, I don't think it's at the beginning of every take. I think he does it like every day, or he just does it like a lot, where he just says, and that's because it's like, we love making movies. And he gets like everybody on set to say it. It's either I love making movies, or it's like, because making movies is fun, or like something. And he gets like everybody, the whole crew, to say it. Cause he like literally, and that's a lot of it. It's like, I'm not saying that other directors and other filmmakers don't have a love and passion for making films. Like, obviously that's true. But I think for Tarantino, it's just like, he loves it sort of so much that, you know, it really comes across. And he can pull on all these references. He can pull on all these, this wealth of knowledge, and be like, okay, we're going to do this shot here because this shot is sort of like this, or this shot is like, reminds me of this, like this amazing shot I saw in this movie, or, you know, this style, or I want to use these colors, or I want to use this actor because it's like, you know, he loves the idea of Hollywood, which is, and making movies, and which is why this movie really is his, you know, we use magnum opus. Like, this is his, like, the pinnacle of his filmmaking career, because he loves making, and he loves movies about making movies, which is what this film is.
Yeah. I love that he loves all kinds of cinema, and you touched on that, and how he's constantly drawing on diverse influences to create his stuff. And that's, people might say, well, that's kind of lazy. You're just referencing stuff. You're just taking what other people did and repackaging. Well, no, that's what innovation is. Innovation is, there's a difference between innovation and invention. And innovation is taking what has been done and making it better, or using it in new ways. Invention is true out of nowhere creation. And that happens very rarely, but I think he's capable of that and has done it. But yeah, I mean, I think that wealth of knowledge that you describe is why he has such a such an incredible tool set on which to draw from, and his repertoire of technique and of style is really unparalleled. Like with the things that he does, I don't think a lot of people could get away with doing. It's interesting that he's able to do that, but people tend to think that he's just sort of like, like you say, you talk about the references stuff, that he only watched kung fu and blaxploitation movies, and that was it. But as you said, he is a true cinephile. I read that his favorite genre for long flights are romantic comedies. He's a rom-com guy, which makes me happy. Thinking about Tarantino getting down to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days on a cross-country flight, that brings me a lot of joy. But
he said recently in an interview that he's doing a podcast and he's talking about he's like, I think he says like the greatest beginning to end trilogy of all time, like all three movies, is Toy Story.
Wow.
Which is hilarious. Like, yeah, he says he's talking about Toy Story, and he's like, he recently saw Toy Story 3, and he's saying that it is such a amazing movie. The ending is perfect. And that's why he's like, I'll never watch the fourth one. And if there's another one, I'll never watch that, because it is the perfect, like, first film, second film, third film, like how it's just like all three of them together. He said it's like, it's great. It's amazing, which is, again, it's hilarious. You're sort of like,
I love that.
He would never. Yeah. Just loves Toy Story. But let's get into like sort of the references, or get into this, a deeper dive into this movie, because we could talk about Tarantino specifically all day, but there's lots of references. I mean, this is what makes this movie so fun as an audience member, but as a filmmaker, he gets to recreate essentially what he loved as a kid and as a child, like growing up in LA and like going to the movies, and he's recreating the LA Strip and Hollywood, and like Hollywood Boulevard, and these marquees and the production. That's why the production design won Best Picture. There's nothing more, like the Oscars love movies about Hollywood, like La La Land and all those sorts of things. But he could recreate it, and he's recreating drive-throughs and just like, it's so much detail, and he can just reference. He's like that. What he said, he's like, he can just reference his memory. He remembers what all these places look like because he lived it. Yeah,
absolutely. And the commitment to authenticity, like when you see them driving down the strip, there's so many great tracking shots of people just driving, and none of that, from what I could tell, was augmented in any kind of digital way or in post or anything like that. This seemed like they had just rebuilt reality. Like, this was, they had taken this the Sunset Strip or whatever road it was in Hollywood they were on, and just completely refashioned it in the trappings of the era. It's really, really remarkable. And you talked about how he loved the ending of Toy Story, the way that concluded, the way that wrapped up. And so much of this movie is about that. It's about endings. Most clearly, what we see is the end of two careers. But that coincides with a number of other things that are kind of wrapping up. This movie is set in 1969. So we get the end, at least calendrically speaking, of a decade. And then corollary to that, there's also this cultural identity of the 60s. And even though things like that tend not to terminate as neatly as decades do on a calendar, there is this notion that the idea of 60s innocence ended with the Manson family murders. Do you feel like it's coincidence that Tarantino does this movie as what we believe to be his penultimate film? And are you surprised in any way that this wasn't his last, being that it is all about endings?
Yeah, it is all about endings. I want to make a quick note about the rebuilding of the Sunset Strip.
Yeah, please
do. He wanted the marquees that we sort of see for the theaters and stuff. That was obviously such a big deal back in the the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's like how you knew what was playing. Everything that was put on these marquees throughout the film was what was exactly playing in that theater on that exact date.
I love that commitment.
Which is
That's
amazing.
So great.
Yeah, he says there's that other scene, that huge tracking shot following Cliff Booth as he kind of comes off and he goes into the drive-in, right? And it kind of pans over the screen, and you see like that marquee, and that was like all like they refashioned it. That was still there, but the cars and stuff obviously weren't. So when they kind of pan over the screen, it was this big jib shot, and they bring it up, it goes over. It was shot with miniatures. So, and the guy sort of doing it was like, because the way that the screen was, they had to use miniatures essentially. Or the guy that was doing it was like, like we could just do this with CGI, like nobody will know the difference, because it's that wide shot of the screen as he kind of like pulls into his trailer or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like nobody will be able to tell. And then Tarantino was like, I'll be able to tell. That's what he said. He's like, yeah, I'll know. And he's like, he wants miniatures. There's a physicality to it. It's real. So they have to have like a, pulling the thing across like a little thing, and it's anyway. But, we talked about miniatures. That was
big miniature guy.
Such a
big miniature guys.
Yeah,
here.
We love the miniatures.
Oh yeah.
we love them. Miniatures. But the penultimate film, like idea, like I kind of watched this. I was like, this is his last film. Like this is his sort of his goodbye, his thank you. This is his finish to Hollywood. It'll be very interesting to see sort of what his next film is. And because as we discussed, like there being one more film left, but this idea that this change, this like idea of what like Hollywood was, the Hollywood studio system, and it's sort of like shifting and changing. It's changing with the character. Yeah. There's this idea of like the past, the present, and the future in this film. And we see that with our three main characters. We see that with, Rick being this idea of the past and holding on to that. And Cliff is the present, even though Cliff is connected to Rick, he is living in the now. He's easy going. He's like, whatever, man. He's like, you're Rick Dalton, man. But he's like, I'm happy to do this. He's just happy to be here. He's happy to live in the moment.
Yes.
And then Sharon Tate is really that ideal of the future and what it could be. And not, and it's like, obviously it's a reference to the real story and the real tragedy of what happened. But like, she's pregnant, and even being pregnant is like, it's just fits that sort of idea. And she's the future. She's what we aspire to be. That's why I think she's depicted in such a really awesome way in the film. But the ending, what did you, it's like usually we start, but maybe in this Tarantino fashion, we start at the end. And what did you think of the ending?
I mean, I loved it. It's like, it is an excellent culmination of kind of a meandering story. Like this.
Yes.
It's almost like an episode of Seinfeld. Like this is kind of about nothing, like in a lot of stretches. Like, I mean, yes, there are the character stories, like the personal,
right.
There's a lot of meaning to it, like to the characters on a personal level, but in terms of events of the film, like it's not super eventful, but the ending, obviously you get this kind of, there's a bit of happenstance. They were planning to go to the Polanskis. They wind up running into Rick Dalton. He curses them out for dirty fucking hippies. So then they wind up calling an audible, going to his and then you get this meeting. Like you talked about Rick as I guess sort of an avatar of the past, or a representative of the past, and Cliff being of the present. I love that idea of sort of this trinity that you brought up of Tate being the future, and there's really no greater future than the future left, I guess, unknown, like a future of what if, like one that we will never know, because she was tragically killed, because the life of her child was never given a chance to come into existence. And so there's this wistful kind of what could be about her. And that's why she's such a good representation of the future. And you also see, the Mansons in their way are kind of representative of the future, because they do what they did change the culture and America. And so you
Exactly.
you get this meeting of times, and it's kind of a conflagration, quite literally, because Rick, and I feel like this is kind of representative of Tarantino and his feelings on a lot of new ways of doing things. He takes a fucking flamethrower to it and burns the thing to the ground. And yeah, it's a pretty nice way of rewriting history. I do admire it. But there's also, when it's over, you sort of get this quick return to civility. Like moments after the cops go and stuff like that, you're having drinks at your neighbor's house and you're just sort of talking again.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of ending shot of the gates, which I think you had pointed out as well, which I thought was really interesting and purposeful.
Yeah. The ending for me, there's so many thoughts and directions of the ending, right? Like we see this before in Tarantino's other film, specifically I think about Inglourious Bastards, where he's sort of rewriting history, right? Like he was stuck with Inglourious Bastards for a while. Like, how do I end this? How do I end this? Oh, they'll kill Hitler. And it's like, well, you can't do that. Like, that's not how Hitler died. It's like, well, fuck, why not? Why can't I do that? It's just the same sort of idea. But this is really what this is really, it's a fairy tale, right?
Right.
The movie is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's how fairy tales start. Once upon a time, right? And like you said, once upon a time where, Sharon Tate and 3 of her best friends weren't murdered. And it's like, let's retell that story. Because you're watching, I remember when I first saw this movie and when Manson first shows up halfway through, you're like, oh God, that's what or not even Manson, when Sharon Tate shows up at the beginning sort of thing, you're like, oh God, this is, because everybody sort of knew that it was about like when the first started talking about this film before he even made it, it was like, Tarantino's doing a Manson family, Manson murders film. And you're like, oh God, this is like, he's retelling this story. Like, do we have to do this? And it's like, that's not really what it is about at all. You know? And he's sort of putting this sort of story in it to represent, okay, yeah, there's a changing, but like, man, what if we changed and looked at it from a different point of view? It's a retelling of history. There's also that ending. The ending in general can be interpreted in so many different ways. You're talking about the gates too, and it's like the gates also could represent the pearly gates and like the going to heaven. Like he's going to see these
ending
people that also died. That like he's going to heaven, and this is the another way to look at it is it's like it's just a huge fucking trip that Cliff is on. Because Cliff is sort of our bridge between the past and the future. He's sort of the most representative of us, or like we sort of follow him through his, as much as his Rick story, it's like, it's also Cliff's, and you're like, he does fucking LSD and then he goes on this trip and he's like, he does the inhale and he's like, all right, like, let's do this. Like, it's like when he's about to walk his dog, he's like, he's gonna like, we're going on a trip. Like this is and like, maybe it's just the whole part of that second half of the ending, or that ending after he kind of takes LSD, is like, it's just a whole trip. He even says it when he's doing the fight, when Tex and the girls break in, he says, is this real? And he's like, it's as real as a donut. And,
then they start laughing,
and then he's like, he's just freaking out. And his points so good. It's amazing.
That's so good.
Yeah, but then again, also it like, there's an idea, I'm kind of throwing a lot of stuff at you, but like, then there's this idea of, that Tarantino's dealt with his whole career, is the idea of violence and like the difference between real life violence and movie Hollywood violence. And, there's a reason he doesn't kill them in a, Rick jumps in and shoots them, or like, it's like he has a dog maul. It's cartoonish how over the top and ridiculous it is, right? And he's kind of done this a few times throughout his career. Like he does it a lot in Kill Bill. He did it in Inglourious Bastards. Like he does over the top, foolish violence, and people get offended by it. But it's like, well, it's. Yeah, like I use the word cartoon, but like go watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon from back in the day, and it's like, geez, this is like you actually think about it, and you know, so there's a difference between that violence and him killing these murderers, real life murderers, in such a cartoonish, like a fake fairy tale way, versus, you know, what actually happened, which was like, you know, he's not depicting that. You know, he's not depicting that kind of murder, and that type of death. But
yeah, well, I mean, there's a line in there where the Manson, you know, acolytes are in the car, and they talk about how TV taught them to kill, and now they're going to exact revenge on Rick Dalton, you know, avatar of television, or something like that. And there's a funny dichotomy with violence in our society, where we recognize how awful it is, and we sometimes condemn it, but we're also much more chill about it than, say, sexual content. Like, graphic violence is easier to see than even partial nudity in our culture. This is the taboo that we have. It's very strange. It's always been a source of amusement for me. And the heightened form of violence that we see in Tarantino's movies that you talked about, in Kill Bill, and in this, it is almost cartoonish. And it reminds me very much of Paul Verhoeven, who we talked about in our Total Recall episode. And we praised for what we thought was his satirical use of violence. I think Tarantino's doing something very similar here. Like, he is drawing our attention to it. And you see it, like, when they show the clips of the TV shows, Bounty Law or FBI or whatever show that Cliff is or Rick is on that week. It's pretty like you think like television back then was much more tame. Well, no, like, I mean, he's lighting people up with shotguns, and there's blood spattering, and it is a very heightened form of violence. And I think there's something to be said there about violence's place in our culture and the way we view it, and the dichotic relationship that we do have with it. And it's terrible and appalling when it's something like Manson and his followers, and yet it's celebrated when it's in another context. It's really weird. And, you know, getting back to the idea of endings for a second here. Endings are often framed as death, and we do see death a lot in this movie. And but, you know, like Jerry said to the Rosses, well, quoting Wrath of Khan, death takes place in the shadow of new life. And you mentioned earlier this was a time of transition. Wrath of Khan. Yeah, I think it was the best of those films. You know, I know Jerry will tell you, but for me, the Search for Spock is the better picture. But getting back to what I was saying there, this was a time of transition in Hollywood. You mentioned earlier, the old way of doing things was dying. The studio system as it had been, it was collapsing. And what we got out of that, I'm sure people lost their jobs. I'm sure there was a lot of people who lamented that. But what did come from it was this kind of new life. We got an influx of bearded independent filmmakers who would go on to be some of the greatest directors in all of history. And I'm speaking of guys like Spielberg, of Lucas, Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, and others who were collectively known as the movie brats. And all these guys were raised on TV and movies like Quentin. They all had great beards. They were all film school educated, and they had this tremendous reverence for what they had watched as kids. And they stepped in and they took the industry to new and exciting places while still paying homage to what came before. And that sounds so reminiscent of what Tarantino would go on to do 30 years later. So I think there is something in here about, like, yes, stuff ends and stuff dies, and there's reverence for the old world. But he's not just saying that everything new is bad either.
No, exactly. He's not. He's there's a change, and, you know, it doesn't all necessarily have to be like, change isn't bad. You know, it's the way things evolve. And I think it's nice to be able to look back on things. And that's what we see with the Rick Dalton character, right? Like, he has to go do Italian movies, and he doesn't want to do them. Have you watched any? And, like, I think, you know, you look about you think about spaghetti westerns now, like, they are, like, people look back on them fondly, and they're like a huge part of you know, the filmmaking of the time, and, like, getting those movies made. And they're like, Tarantino has, like, a huge love for spaghetti westerns, and you know, so this changing of the guard isn't necessarily a bad thing, I think, and I think Tarantino sort of acknowledges that. just to kind of put a cap on the Cliff, the stuntman Cliff character, and this like how we see all these characters and we see like what they represent. There's like I had mentioned, we sort of, Cliff's not our representation in the film, but we sort of are like, we see a lot of the film through his eyes, but we can also interpret it a certain way. And how we interpret the ending, and really these characters and really what this film is, can be seen through how we interpret how Cliff is presented. And specifically during his like flashback scenes halfway through the film, when it's talking about, we have the flashback in the flashback, where it's like we have, where he's on fixing the thing on the roof, and he has the flashback to when he was on the set of the Green Hornet, and Bruce Lee moment, where Bruce Lee's family and friends were actually very like pissed off with Tarantino about how he was depicted, and it was like a sore spot in the film, because a lot of people were like, well, he's kind of presented as a dick. And it was like, well, there's like evidence that Bruce Lee was kind of a dick. Like, and he did actually beat the shit out of like stuntmen and stuff on his films. But that aside, if you think about that out of context, this is Cliff's flashback. We see him right before it fades to him being there. And he's thinking about, and after that whole moment with the flashback, he comes back to reality and he sort of says, yeah, it was probably good. Like, yeah, he was probably right. So it's like, it's clearly his flashback. So he's thinking about it differently than it might have actually occurred. Correct. Right. Like that's how I'm interpreting it, and even in that moment in the flashback where it was like, he killed his wife. Oh, you don't believe that. And it's like, then again, we get another flashback in the flashback where the wife is being an annoying person and just telling him off on the boat, and it's like
she had it coming.
He has the gun. So it's like, how do we interpret that? Do we interpret that this is his point of view and he was wrong in murdering his wife, or was it really an accident, or did she actually he's just like, we're meant to think about that. And then the ending becomes like, then he kills like 2 or 3 other people at the end, and you're like, oh, now Cliff is actually a psychopath, because he's actually murdering people. In the novel, Tarantino's novel, he does actually, I think he kills like 3 other people. Like, so it's like very definitive that he kills the wife.
Oh, really?
He kills 3 other people, including another stuntman. So it's like, he is and that's sort of referenced in the when he's talking to the hippie girl in the car, and he's sort of like, I've been dodging the police my whole life, or jail my whole life, and I'm not going to go for some Putin.
Well, that's right. And this sort of goes back to the idea of there being good and bad in both old and new. Cliff is the perfect representation of this, because he is, like you say, he kind of straddles both worlds, but there's like, he's a war hero. They talk about that. Like it's referenced in the conversation that Kurt Russell and Leo have. He's a goddamn war hero. But it also seems pretty clear that he killed his wife. So you got good and you got bad. And then you've got, there's new actors coming up that are taking roles that Rick would go after. Bad for him. But then there are some members of this new guard of actor, not one who is taking roles from Rick, but still they're people like Trudy Frazier, aka Pumpkin Puss, the young female actor who, she's a young actress who doesn't want to be called an actress. She doesn't want to be called Pumpkin Puss either, which I can't imagine why. But she's challenging the old ways. She's sort of this new burgeoning feminist ideal in Hollywood. She's very smart. She's dedicated to what she does, and she's compassionate towards Rick when he's struggling, when he sees that he's coming to the end of the road. And so again, you have good. She's part of the new school, but she's representative of the good in the new school, like what we should be progressing towards. And then we touched on the Mansons earlier, and how their crimes ushered in a new era in America. And you could probably chart a lot of our grim fascination with crime and murder, and our growing mistrust and cynicism starting from this night in 1969. And that is an aspect of the new world that I think Tarantino probably rails against. So hence, that's why you see Rick take a flamethrower, which is a prop from an old movie that he did, very reminiscent of Inglourious Bastards, where he sets Nazi command on fire. So you see him take a flamethrower to the Manson girl. Can't recall her name now, but he lights her up. And again, so it's there's death and new life. There's good and bad, and yeah, you really sort of see it all, because it would be very easy to just think of Tarantino as troglodytic and someone who only appreciates the old, because we do see so much of that aesthetic of the bygone in his movies. But that's not what's being said here. There is an openness to the new world too.
And even in how he's making these films too, and how, like, I talked about it earlier, he's using miniatures, he's rebuilding these sets. Like he's obsessed, and he's quoted as saying this in a ton of interviews for this film, when he's promoting it. He talks about his obsession with the media, of the media on media format, which was just vital to him. So it's like he is shooting Bounty Law. He shot tons of stuff for the actual what he used in the film. Like he's like, there is so much more. He shot that on 16 millimeters. So he shot it on what they would shoot it on. And it's like very reminiscent. And he's like, there's 8 millimeter, like the home footage stuff. And there's all this like sort of media that he was like, he's like, I need to shoot on this style. I need to shoot on this format. I need to shoot in this format. I need to, he needs to recreate. I know the Bounty Law thing, he said that they shot that all in one day. So the beginning of the movie where they do like the, this is the NBC and like, we're on set of Bounty Law. And like, I'm here with Rick Dalton. And he's like, they had to shoot that setup. And then all of the Bounty Law stuff in one day. And it was like 40, they said they did 40 different setups, which is like, he said DiCaprio was just running around like a madman, like doing just moment after moment, getting all the Bounty Law stuff. And Tarantino has said like that was the funnest stuff for him to shoot. Like nice. He loved shooting that because he was like, it just looked exactly how he wanted it to, but it looked exactly like what he was referencing. Wanted Dead or Alive or FBI or like these, like you mentioned, these old shows. And it just looked exactly, he was just like blown away. It's like, this is exactly what he wants it to look like. I'm recreating my childhood watching these shows, which was kind of what he did.
Yeah. Just sort of, it's interesting. You're talking about Rick and Cliff, and they're such a cool duo in this movie. Obviously, you have two of the greats of our generation, and really a couple of generations. These guys have spanned, Leo and Brad. It's interesting to me that the people who Rick plays, that's actually who Cliff is in a lot of ways. Like Cliff is the real deal when you think about it. He's handsome, he's buff, he's capable. Sure. But he lives in a trailer while Rick is up in the hills. But like when Cliff rolls into Spawn Ranch, he's basically like a cowboy rolling into a town. Yeah. He's this bad 100%. Dude coming in, and he handles everything with this kind of courageous indifference, just tossing Bruce Lee around and knocking the teeth out of hippies and making him change his tire that they slash while he watches. Meanwhile, Rick, when he's not on set, he stammers and is plagued with self-doubt and self-loathing. I wonder about that. And what, is there a comment here on actors and stuntmen? Is it something about authenticity in Hollywood or the craft of acting? I don't quite know, but I love these characters and I love them as a duo and what the kind of thoughts that it inspires. Because I don't have a conclusion there. I just have a lot of thoughts.
Well, I love that he, excuse me. No, excuse me.
God bless you.
I feel like he, so the Cliff and Rick relationship. And I love how it's depicted through, like, you talk about how, what Rick portrays is actually more similar to who Cliff is as a person. And Rick is like kind of stammering and he's pretty clearly an alcoholic and like, or can't, not even just an alcoholic, but like can't really handle his booze, has the DUI, like he needs to like forgetting his lines because he gets so drunk. Whereas like Cliff is always sort of, he's drinking too, his bottomless Bloody Marys on the plane, but it's like he's always in control. Like even when he's high on LSD, he's in control. And he lives in a trailer, but like there's these great shots of like it's a small set. And this is why production design, this is why they won best, not just for recreating old Hollywood, but like things like you go to his trailer and it's like there's comic books and there's like this old TV guide and there's this like the craft dinner box and then the like the can of the like all these like little like props and things. It's just so like the detail is so good and it's just a reflection of sort of who he is. And then you go to Rick's house and Rick's house isn't like, he's talking like I'm in the Hollywood Hills. It's like, and you live here and you're part of Hollywood. And that's such an important thing to him. But like, also it's like, okay, he's in the Hollywood Hills. He has like a pool, but it's not like he's not living in this massive mansion. Like he's not how we sort of would perceive, okay, you live in the Hollywood Hills, like you're a big actor or whatever. He's just kind of like this modest house, but his styling is like very reflective of him, right? He's very like you said, self-conscious. He's like, all the posters, all the art in his house is all stuff from his movies or his TV shows. It's all like, it's all his stuff that he's like taken from props from movies. And it's like, it's all sort of to self-grandize his self and his own image, right? And his validation of like who he is, because it's getting taken away from him, right?
That's right.
And so it's things like that kind of make this such a deeper, because it would be easy to kind of make Rick like live in this like big fancy place or whatever, but it's like it is very reminiscent of something where he would live, like where an actor of his stature would live.
Yeah. And I mean, you talked about how the touches of production design contribute to character creation. And I love how many shots there are of Brad Pitt's moccasins. And it just it says so much about who he is as a dude, and just by simply showing his feet, like it's a funny little sort of little gag, and it's also very telling, and that's clever filmmaking for sure. And Tarantino and the feet, man.
Tarantino and the feet, like, I mean, he's been known, he has this, I don't know if he actually has a foot fetish, but he has this, it was just running joke that like, he displays women's feet even back with, he cast himself in the movie he wrote, Dusk Till Dawn. He's sort of he was cast as George Clooney's brother. Somehow they were.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and then he's sucking Selma Hayek's feet in the strip club scene. It's all the way back to there, and then he's like featured women's feet in a ton of his movies, like the Kill Bill movies. And anyway, I think he leans into it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's just like, yeah, okay, like whether it's an actual thing, but he's the hippies putting the feet on the windshield. There's the shot of Margot Robbie's feet when she's asleep, after their night at the Playboy Mansion. It's like it starts on the feet, it pans up. There's the shot of her and her feet are over the seats while she's in the movie theater. There's all these references to feet, which is just Tarantino sort of being self-referential and saying like, okay, like I know what everybody says about me with the feet, like I'm just gonna hammer it home. Like whether it's actually he's into it or whatever is another thing. But I want to talk about so the Margot Robbie specifically, okay, with the feet, not with the feet, but with her in general.
But we can touch on the feet.
Okay. People had an issue. People were like, first of all, the Sharon Tate's family, her sister, were a bit apprehensive to start, as you would imagine. Like, sure, you're gonna. Like, why do we need to keep retelling this story, or why do we have to like now do a retelling of it, like a dramatization of murders? But Tarantino was very, very considerate when kind of writing this, but also considering the family and met with the family and got them to read the script and was like sort of like listen, this isn't. I'm not I'm not retelling this violent murder. I don't like, this is sort of like a retelling of like maybe what could have been, or, it's really depicting her in such a positive light.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow people still got rotted with it and were like, well, Margot Robbie only has 6 lines in the movie, or like however, like, why does she not have more lines? And it's like, okay, like, let's talk about this. Okay. Like, that's people, that's what you're going to argue about. That's what like Tarantino was, he's been asked about this when promoting the movie and whatever. And he got like, quote, I refuse your hypothesis. Like, essentially saying like, that, in some way that like an actress or a female actor like not doesn't deserve the lines that Brad Pitt or Leo or like somebody, you know what I mean? It's just like, oh, they're like, I don't know what they're inferring, but like the very clear depiction of Sharon Tate in this is so interesting. And I look at her as such a powerful character. And it's like, he's depicting her and retelling. It's like she's taking in this story, Sharon Tate, the character, maybe the person, is taking back her life and taking back her story. And it starts with the male gaze in the beginning. The male gaze being that like how male filmmakers or how artists, how people depict females on screen in a very sexualized manner. And that's how she's sort of presented at the beginning. It's like how Sharon Tate was. She wasn't a sex symbol, but she was like this beautiful, gorgeous, like actor from that time that like people were enamored with. She was a fashion icon. Like she was very popular. And then like, that's how the film sort of starts. You're like, sort of, okay, this is how it goes. And then when that scene happens where she goes and buys the book and she's going to buy the book from the bookshop and then she watches her own movie. Like that's one of the best scenes in the whole movie for me. And it's like, and she has that great moment where she says like, like I'm in the movie. Like, what if I'm in the movie? And they're like, who are you? Right? Like, that's me. I'm in the movie, and take the picture. And it's like, I'm the klutz. And it's like, oh, this person is just, it goes from being this, like, I want to say like sexualized depiction of somebody or presentation to like this, like, I don't want to say empathetic, but like this person is just pure good and kind and caring and just like genuine. Like when she's going to the movie, she's not going to the movie to be like, oh, I want to like, she's going because she's like, oh, she's just so excited. She's like, this is my movie. Like you can't help but feel like this is such a caring, loving person. Right. And that's, and even then at the very end, how she's depicted is just so wonderful. It's just like as a caring, compassionate, loving person and inviting Rick up. To like, that's Rick Dalton. It's like, oh, come up. And I love how she's depicted, and I love how Margot Robbie depicted her.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other ways to be utilized as an actor beyond speaking. Lines are not necessarily the end all be all, and I could see the argument that maybe she's a little underutilized in this. But I love what you just talked about, because I wondered about them, like her that stretch where she goes to see her own movie, and I sort of thought like, what's the purpose? Like, why is that there? And I think you're right. It is. You see her. She's going to. Yeah, there's a sweetness. There's a sweetness about her, an innocence, which I think is essential. And she's not going there to be fawned over or to have people, say, "Oh my God, no."
Exactly.
She's really excited to be in movies. She loved this, and she wants to see her work. She wants to, to give her some credit. I think maybe she wants to analyze her work and try to improve it. But really, what it comes down to is just this really, I guess, incorruptible joy and fondness for films, and that's a good thing. And you talked about her as a representation of the future, and there is something very like this woman. Her life was cut short, so when you think about her as a historical figure, there's something aspirational and I guess unrequited about her. And what could be more sort of beautiful and innocent than that? It's this thing that was cut short in its perfection. It never got a chance to age or fade away. It was cut off before it had a chance to even fully grow. So there's something in that, and I like that scene more now, having heard your sort of your feelings on it. And yeah, it's interesting too to have Margot Robbie as this character, because in another era, maybe we don't get to see Margot Robbie be a great actor, which we do thankfully get to see nowadays. She gets roles where she is able to flex her muscles. But in the 60s, maybe she would have been another Sharon Tate who was kind of relegated to playing, sex object, objectified characters or klutzes or whatever, in Valley of the Dolls. And because in my research, from what I could tell, Sharon Tate was not really respected as an actor in her lifetime. That was not necessarily who she was.
As you said, didn't get that opportunity, right?
And so it's interesting now in the modern iteration of this person is Margot Robbie, someone who we deeply admire as an actor, and rightly so. And that's an interesting kind of juxtaposition there of eras and people in them.
Yeah, and there's it's just very, I love that scene too where they're at the Playboy Mansion and you got the Steve McQueen character sort of saying she left him, like she loves her. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just sort of like playing everything out for you. And there's just this endearing feeling of her character, but then also, like you said, of Margot Robbie, where you're just sort of like, oh, that's kind of a dick thing. Like she's still keeping this J guy around and she's married the director and you're like, she's kind of stringing him along. But you also, in your sense, you sort of feel like, okay, like that's fine. Like now the three of them are inseparable and you're like, okay, cool. I'm on board with that. Like, I don't feel bad about that. So
yeah, and it does. To interrupt briefly, to talk, because you talked about how initially the view of her is through the male gaze, and that's kind of what you get there with McQueen, is quite literally the male gaze, staring at her and analyzing her in that very subjective way, and that's kind of cool because he's defining her by her male relationships rather than anything she does.
And that's early in the film, right?
Yeah, that's a very
and that's how we have sort of done that. Yeah, that's how we, I think, as a society did it with Sharon Tate. And it's like, or not even just more so just like how she is thought. Like when you think of Sharon Tate, like it's like she's associated with, I think you want to say like the most popular serial killer, I think, of all time, right? When you think about it,
weird as that is to say, you are correct. He is a killer celebrity.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And that's how whereas that's how it's sort of presented at the beginning, but then I think that shifts, and then it's like she's presented in this different light, which is, I think, a really great one. Yeah. So there's so much more I want to talk about in this film, but we're over an hour in.
I know, but can we talk briefly about Leo and I do want to just touch on the other.
Yes, okay. The Leo and Brad thing. They're amazing in the sense that I just love that it's Tarantino making a movie about Hollywood with essentially, in our lifetime anyway, there aren't any two bigger male stars, I think. I mean, you could make the argument that Tom Cruise, but Tom Cruise I think is more of an action star. I would say Hollywood actor, you think of DiCaprio and Brad Pitt anyway in this generation, right? And they grew up in Hollywood. Like they've been here since the 80s and they've been making movies, right? And this is really the pinnacle for I feel like for them as well. Yeah.
Leo was nominated for Best Actor in this role, but did not win. He got his Oscar a few years earlier for The Revenant, Il Revenante.
Il Revenante.
It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but man, I think you mentioned it earlier too, this is his best work. That scene in his trailer, like that self-flagellation that he delivers, and followed by the evil Hamlet scene, is superb. And anytime he says "fucking hippies," I die. I absolutely love it. Do you think this is his best work, or are there others that you would put above it?
I do have a couple others above it. Specifically, actually, I have one that goes, well, maybe two. I think Wolf of Wall Street is his.
I was gonna be that would be my guess for your yeah.
I love Wolf of Wall Street. I also think that I mean, The Revenant he's great in, but I also think he's really, really strong in Django.
True.
You know, in that sort of supporting role. But like he's amazing in this movie too. Like you said, it's like it seems like it's a role that would be sort of like, okay, like you're just this old, like, you know, kind of turning the corner actor that's, you know, blah blah blah. But it's like what the subtle things he does. You know, that scene they said with the trailer, it's like it's so good. First of all, how Tarantino decides to shoot that, right? Like he shot stuff like the Bounty Law stuff. He could shoot that, but he's shooting it like a modern TV, or like he's shooting it as you would watch now. But he's like, you know, but then he breaks that and he's like, line, you know what I mean? You get sort of caught up in that. He's shooting movies with TV within movies within, you know what I mean? There's all these layers.
Yeah, it's a Hall of Mirrors, you know? Thing. Like, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So initially he didn't actually have that written in the script, that scene of him in the trailer. DiCaprio went to him and was like, I think he should have a freak out in the trailer.
Oh,
so they sort of talked about it, and Tarantino was like, okay, but it has to be like, he wanted it to be like Taxi Driver, when De Niro is in the mirror, like, you know, that iconic scene of him in his apartment and looking in the mirror, you talking to me. So the whole scene of him freaking out in the trailer, Leo improv the whole thing.
I was about to say, I believe that. I absolutely believe that. 8 whiskey sours. You got to have 8 whiskey sours. You can't stop at 3. It's so good.
Yeah. Idiot. Everybody thinks you're stupid. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's incredible. Incredible.
But then what's so good about his performance then is the you know, the next scene, like you said, the Hamlet scene. Like he is so good in that.
So good.
As the Rick Dalton portraying this character, and the character, you're so believable, and you're like, he's really, and like the little girl going up and saying, you know, that was the best acting. After she said that, I was sort of saying that in my head. I was like, man, that was like the best acting I've seen of this. And then she sort of says, I was like, oh, that's sort of the point, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
You know, and it's just like, and again, the sort of the fourth wall that they, you know, the director sort of like, in that improv, that scene, like you improv that, like the
triple alliterative,
yeah, the triple alliterative, and he's like, I improved it. It's like he clearly didn't improv it, like you know, he clearly did not, but like, you know,
I don't know, maybe he did. I mean, it was
no. It's like I think
that was in the script, but I think yes. the truth of the movie is that he did. I think so.
You mean the truth of Tarantino's movie?
Yeah, like I think within the context of the movie, the character Rick Dalton did improvise that. I don't think Leo did in the moment, but like I think the character of Rick Dalton did.
I think it was. I think. Well, that I know that was obviously written in this Tarantino script.
Yes,
that
of course.
Moment. Yeah. But I think Dalton planned that. I think in this story. He's like, how do I, because he's like, I really need to hit this. He's like, okay, think of like some way that I can improv or do something. You know what I mean? He's like, so he's just trying to, and he's planning for this. Cause I think, yeah, anyway, that's whatever. That's up for interpretation. Yeah. But Brad Pitt too. I think like, you know, for Brad Pitt, you know, you don't want to say that he got the Oscar because it was sort of like this, you know, this is the, you know, why Scorsese won for Departed, right? And why, like, you know, it's sort of this, you're getting this because it's, you know, it's not a Lifetime Achievement Award, but it was a great performance. But it's like, again, it's sort of the subtlety of this character. He's kind of a psychopath. Like, and I kind of referencing this before, like maybe he did murder his wife.
Oh, he murdered.
He also
I think he did.
I
think he did
violently kills 3 people at the end. You know,
who deserved it? To be fair,
but
that was a justified killing. To be sure.
Yes, but I mean, like, there's also justified killings, and then they're smashing a person's face into a phone repeatedly, and then like stomping on their face.
Yeah,
you know, and blowing them away with flamethrower. Like, I'm not saying no, but. You know, but like this is like, again, could be like a Brad Pitt thing, but he has this charm about him, right? Like, you're like, it's like, oh, the girl asks if she can, give him a sexual favor on the car ride drive home. And you're like, oh God. And then he's like, nope. It's like, he has like a line he doesn't cross, right? And
Sure,
he's like, I don't want to, he's very aware. And you're like, this guy is so, and he's getting on and then it's like how Tarantino shoots him, right? He's getting on the roof and he takes off and it's like that Brad Pitt, you're just like, this guy is a fucking Hollywood superstar. Like
absolutely. And
how you would think of as
for sure. And he does end up winning Best Supporting Actor here. And I do love him in this.
Yeah, of course.
But for me, this is actually not even his best Tarantino role. He didn't win shit for Inglourious Bastards, and I find that perplexing. He won more acting awards for World War Z than he did for Bastards, if you can believe that. And did I watch a different movie than everybody else? I thought he was incredible in Bastards, and as good as this was, I think that was better.
Oh, I like this better than Bastards. His performance,
the role.
But I do think
really?
He's great.
Wow.
No. I think the character is more interesting in Bastards, but his performance is stronger in this film.
Wow, that's interesting.
But that's not to say I don't think he's amazing in Bastards. I think he's great, and I like specifically. I think about this scene, the movie premiere screening scene where he's like
Gorlami,
the Italian, and Gorlami.
Yeah.
But I so but that's a discussion for another day. Man, we could keep talking about this movie.
Easily.
We've only scratched the surface, but we got to get into our hell of a picture closing remarks and decide if this is Tarantino's penultimate film is a hell of a picture. Mm-hmm. So what do you think? I said he's my GOAT. I don't think he's made a bad film. That's not to say that all of his films are hell of a pictures, because they might not be. But what do you think? Where does your head go for this?
Well, I talked earlier about judging great filmmakers against themselves and not their peers.
Yes.
And I had to remind myself of that a few times when considering this movie as a hell of a picture or not. And I'm not sure where this ranks for me in the list of Tarantino's 9. It could be top 3. It could be bottom 3. I honestly don't know. But I really like watching it. And there's such a great commitment to design. We talked about that at length. The performances are unforgettable. The script is fantastic. The story is very quintessential Tarantino. You could say some aspects of it are kind of pointless, like in meandering, but I don't care. I love that. I love that because I think what's the substance of it, what's in there is so strong. And this movie celebrates a lot of what I think Mr. Ross was talking about when he said, that's a hell of a picture. A lot of what that conjures for me, I see here. And this is a way better love letter to film and Hollywood than the fucking Fabelmans. If you want to talk about two movies that they're in some ways there are similarities in that they are preaching a reverence for film and its history and all that stuff.
Right.
But this is the vastly superior form of love letter because I think it's more honest, because I don't think it's all love. I think there's a lot of good and bad in here. There's a more complicated kind of relationship described. And yeah, I think this is a hell of a picture for me. I'm going to give it to it.
Yeah. So for me, you bring up a lot of interesting thoughts with that. I think one kind of keynote to talk about with films, and like you said, specifically when you're referencing a director or writer, director, filmmaker with respect to like, this could be top 3 or bottom 3. Like, I don't know. Like, It fluctuates and changes. Like, I think that's a sign of a great filmmaker. When you can watch a movie, like I rewatched Pulp Fiction a little while ago. I was like, man, this is my favorite Tarantino. This is so good. And then I watched this twice this week and I was like, I think this might be my favorite Tarantino. You know what I mean? It's like, this is how it goes with him, right? You find new things about the films, and it's like, I can reorder my how I rank all of his films, but like that always changes because they're so good, but you keep rediscovering them and finding new things about them. I love that you kind of talk about this in respect to being like, okay, this is like Mr. Ross's, that's a hell of a picture. Like, the first thing that this, when this movie starts and he has the first scene where he's walking to meet Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz. Yeah, 14 Makasi. That's a picture. Oh, he's like, yeah, it's a good picture.
Exactly.
Good picture. And I was just like, yeah, that is the scene from Seinfeld where Mr. Ross is like, this is the pictures. This is what we're talking about, pictures.
Yes.
There's something nostalgic about it. There's something you can revisit about it, but this is a, Hollywood picture. It's in lights. That's what this is. And for me, absolutely, this is a hell of a picture, without a doubt. So yeah, we're in agreement. Hell of a picture. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So yeah, so the with all that to be said, we're keeping with the Tarantino trade next week.
Yes, of course.
Maybe a couple weeks. But we're gonna look. We both love Tarantino. I obviously have told you guys he's my favorite, but that doesn't mean all of his movies are hell of a pictures. There are great ones, but there are like not so, incredible. Like, yeah, obviously we talk about the rankings. The rankings change. We're gonna do one from now, or recent, one from the middle of his career, maybe one from the early on. And I think next, David, do you want to tell everybody what we're gonna hop into?
I will, and I hope I'm right, because we did talk about this and debate it for a little while. So if I'm wrong, that'll be fun too. But I think we are going to Inglourious Bastards, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. You are right.
Goodness. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, my aforementioned favorite pit performance in a Tarantino film or any film. And yeah, I will sort of tip my hand a little bit here going into this, that I'm pretty sure Bastards is my favorite Tarantino film. So I will. Okay. I will reveal a little bit there leading into next week. Pretty sure.
But is it mine? Is it mine? That will be the discussion, and we need both of us to make a hell of a picture. So we'll see.
That's right.
It's it is quite an interesting. We mentioned it a bunch on this podcast, but there is reference to this, specifically the flamethrower, the movie that Rick Dalton shoots about the Nazis is sort of a reference to Bastards. And, this is a kind of a retelling of history, similar to this one. So he made this in the middle of his career. It was his seventh. Actually, I think this was his seventh film.
Yeah, because it went Bastards, Hateful Eight, then Once Upon a Time. No, it was the sixth. So what was the...
Django,
right. Forgot about Django.
It went Bastards, Django, Hateful Eight. So he made this right after Death Proof. He did Kill Bill, Death Proof. And but the interesting thing, the one thing I want to end on, we went before we put a cap on this Once Upon a Time. Death Proof is when he started writing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And he got the original idea watching Kurt Russell, who was in this film, Hollywood, and with his stunt double, who was essentially a Cliff Booth. And he said he was sitting he's told the story Tarantino's told the story a bunch of times. I'll retell it. He was sitting on like a soapbox across the kind of like the set of Death Proof. And he sort of like was watching Kurt Russell and his stunt double in the same sort of outfit, just like shooting the shit. And he was like, and Kurt Russell had gone to him because Tarantino was like, the movie Death Proof is about stuntmen and stuff. And Kurt Russell sort of went to him and was like, listen, he essentially had the conversation that Tarantino or that DiCaprio has with Kurt Russell in the trailer, where he's like, just give him put him in costume. And he's like, if he's, it's not no with excuses, that sort of scene.
Yeah.
Like Kurt Russell had that conversation with Tarantino. He's like, I got this guy, I got my guy. He's done a bunch of stuff, but he's like sort of, and Tarantino said it was looking at them across the set and he was thinking, man, that's an interesting relationship. Like years ago, they were like spitting images of each other. Like, you wouldn't even have to like put anything on them. But now it's like they've sort of like, this is the last grasp for like using his buddy, right? And it's like that would be an interesting relationship to sort of follow. So that's where he got his inspiration was Kurt Russell and Death Proof. Anyway, Inglourious Bastards next week.
Love it.
That's going to be a fun one. Okay, great. So for David Hollingsworth, my name is Andrew Bartlett. This has been Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and this has been Once Upon a Time on Hell of a Picture.